The morning briefing at the Pentagon's Strategic Operations Center began like any other Tuesday in November 2018. Admiral Patricia Richardson, a decorated naval officer with 30 years of service, stood before a room filled with the military's brightest minds. The walls were lined with monitors displaying global intelligence feeds, and the air hummed with the quiet tension that always accompanied high-level security meetings. Richardson had earned her reputation through decades of calculated decisions and unwavering leadership. Her colleagues respected her analytical mind and her ability to remain calm under pressure. She had navigated through some of the Navy's most challenging operations, from counter-terrorism missions in the Middle East to strategic planning during international crises. Her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform displayed ribbons that told the story of a distinguished career. The briefing covered routine intelligence updates from various global hotspots. Officers presented data on submarine movements in the South China Sea, terrorist activities in North Africa, and cybersecurity threats against military installations. Richardson listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that demonstrated her deep understanding of military strategy and international relations. As the formal presentations concluded, the atmosphere in the room relaxed slightly. This was the time when officers often engaged in informal discussions about ongoing operations or shared insights from their respective departments. The conversation flowed from technical discussions about new weapons systems to analysis of political developments that could affect military planning. It was during this casual period that Colonel James Morrison, a respected intelligence officer known for his dry humor, decided to pose what he considered a lighthearted question. Morrison had served alongside Richardson on several joint operations and felt comfortable enough to engage in what he assumed would be harmless banter. He had noticed that several female officers in the room had been discussing the growing recognition of women's contributions to military operations, particularly in specialized roles that had traditionally been male-dominated. Morrison stood up with a slight grin and addressed Richardson directly. His question seemed innocent enough on the surface, designed to acknowledge the increasing presence of women in elite military positions. He asked Richardson what her call sign would be if she were assigned to a covert operation requiring a code name. The question appeared to be a casual attempt at humor, perhaps referencing the practice of assigning memorable nicknames to operatives in classified missions. Richardson initially responded with a light chuckle, assuming Morrison was simply making conversation. She had dealt with similar questions throughout her career, often from colleagues who were curious about the experiences of women in high-ranking military positions. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as other officers continued their discussions, seemingly unaware that this particular exchange was about to take an unexpected turn. The Admiral's first instinct was to deflect the question with humor, as she had done countless times before when faced with inquiries that seemed designed more for entertainment than genuine military discussion. She had learned early in her career that maintaining a balance between professionalism and approachability was crucial for effective leadership, especially as one of the few women to reach such a high rank in the Navy. However, something in Morrison's expression suggested that his question might not be as casual as it initially appeared. Richardson noticed that several other officers had stopped their conversations and were listening to the exchange with unusual interest. The room's dynamics began to shift subtly, though most people present remained unaware of the significance of what was about to unfold. Richardson's years of experience had taught her to read situations carefully, and she sensed that there might be more to Morrison's inquiry than simple curiosity. She had spent decades in environments where information was compartmentalized and where seemingly innocent questions sometimes carried deeper implications. Her training in intelligence operations had sharpened her ability to detect when conversations moved beyond casual interaction into territory that required more careful consideration. The Admiral paused for a moment, considering her response. She looked around the room, noting the faces of her colleagues and the subtle changes in their attention levels. Years of military service had taught her that even informal moments could have unexpected consequences, and she had learned to approach such situations with appropriate caution while maintaining the collegial atmosphere that was essential for effective teamwork. What Richardson didn't know was that her answer to Morrison's seemingly simple question would reveal information that would fundamentally change how everyone in that room understood her role in the military and her contributions to national security. The casual nature of the moment was about to give way to a revelation that would leave her colleagues stunned and force them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the Admiral's career and capabilities. Colonel Morrison's question hung in the air longer than he had anticipated. What had started as a casual inquiry was beginning to feel more significant as Richardson studied his face with the careful attention of someone trained to read between the lines. The other officers in the room continued their conversations, but Morrison noticed that the Admiral's demeanor had shifted from casual amusement to something more thoughtful and measured. Richardson had spent enough time in intelligence circles to recognize when a question carried weight beyond its surface meaning. Morrison was known for his sharp analytical mind and his involvement in some of the military's most sensitive operations. His question about call signs wasn't the kind of idle curiosity that typically emerged during informal moments in briefing rooms. She realized that he might already know something about her background that most of her current colleagues did not. The Admiral's career had been carefully constructed over 3 decades, with certain chapters that remained classified even among her peers in the Pentagon. While her official record showed a distinguished path through various naval commands and strategic positions, there were gaps in her service history that were explained only as special assignments or classified operations. These periods were known to exist but were not discussed in detail, even in secure environments like the Strategic Operations Center. Morrison had recently been assigned to review personnel files for a new joint task force, and his security clearance had given him access to information that revealed more about Richardson's background than most people knew. What he had discovered in those classified files had surprised him and prompted his seemingly casual question. He was testing whether Richardson would acknowledge what he had learned, or if she would maintain the careful separation between her public military persona and her classified activities. Richardson understood that her response needed to be carefully calibrated. She could deflect the question entirely, maintaining the status quo and keeping her classified background separate from her current role. Alternatively, she could acknowledge what Morrison had discovered, potentially opening a conversation that would reveal aspects of her career that had remained hidden from most of her colleagues for years. The Strategic Operations Center where they stood was one of the most secure facilities in the Pentagon, with clearance levels that permitted discussion of highly classified material. However, the presence of multiple officers with varying levels of security access meant that any revelation would need to be handled with appropriate discretion. Richardson was acutely aware that her words could either satisfy Morrison's curiosity while maintaining operational security, or potentially expose information that was meant to remain compartmentalized. As she considered her options, Richardson reflected on the years she had spent operating under various identities and call signs in some of the military's most sensitive operations. These assignments had taken her far from traditional naval duties and had required skills that went well beyond conventional military training. The work had been dangerous, often conducted in hostile territories where discovery would have meant capture or death. Her colleagues knew her as a strategic thinker and an effective leader, but they were unaware of the operational experience that had shaped her analytical abilities and her calm demeanor under pressure. The missions she had conducted had given her insights into enemy capabilities and international threats that informed her current role in military planning, but the specific details of those operations remained classified at levels that prevented discussion, even in secure settings. Morrison waited for her response, aware that he had potentially placed Richardson in a difficult position. His access to her classified record had been legitimate and necessary for his current assignment, but bringing that information into a casual conversation was testing the boundaries of appropriate discussion. He was curious to see whether Richardson would acknowledge the reality of her background or maintain the careful compartmentalization that had characterized her approach to discussing her career. The other officers in the room remained largely unaware of the significance of the exchange, continuing their own conversations about ongoing operations and strategic developments. However, a few individuals with higher security clearances had begun to pay attention to the conversation between Morrison and Richardson, sensing that something more substantive was developing beneath the surface of what had appeared to be casual banter. Richardson realized that Morrison's question represented a crossroads in how she managed the different aspects of her identity within the military hierarchy. Her classified background had always been separate from her public role, but the convergence of her current position with Morrison's knowledge created an opportunity to bridge that gap in a controlled way. She understood that her response would determine whether this moment would pass as a minor exchange or become something more significant for everyone present in the room. Richardson's mind traveled back through the years as she stood in the Strategic Operations Center, weighing her response to Morrison's question. The classified chapters of her career had begun almost 2 decades earlier, when her exceptional performance in naval intelligence had caught the attention of a joint task force that operated in the shadows of official military structure. She had been approached for special assignment while serving as a lieutenant commander, and her life had taken a dramatic turn that few people would ever know about. The transition from conventional naval duties to covert operations had required extensive additional training that took place at facilities that didn't appear on any official maps. Richardson had spent months learning skills that went far beyond traditional military education. She had studied languages, mastered surveillance techniques, learned to blend into civilian populations, and developed the psychological resilience necessary for long-term undercover work. The training had been physically and mentally demanding, preparing her for operations where failure could mean death and success would never be publicly acknowledged. Her first assignment had taken her to Eastern Europe during a period of political instability that created opportunities for intelligence gathering. Operating under a carefully constructed civilian identity, she had spent 18 months establishing relationships with individuals who had access to information about weapons trafficking and terrorist financing. The work required her to suppress her military bearing and adopt the mannerisms and concerns of someone with no connection to American intelligence services. The psychological challenges of maintaining dual identities had been significant. Richardson had learned to compartmentalize her thoughts and emotions, keeping her true identity and mission separate from the persona she presented to her targets. She had developed relationships with people she was simultaneously deceiving, knowing that their trust in her false identity was essential for mission success. The moral complexity of this work had shaped her understanding of the difficult choices that were sometimes necessary for national security. Over the years, her assignments had taken her to various global hotspots where conventional military presence would have been impossible or counterproductive. She had operated in the Middle East during periods of regional conflict, gathering intelligence on terrorist networks that were planning attacks against American interests. She had worked in Southeast Asia, tracking the movement of weapons and technology that could threaten regional stability. Each mission had required her to adapt to different cultures and political environments while maintaining her cover and pursuing objectives that were critical to national security. The call sign that Morrison was asking about had been assigned to her during one of her most dangerous assignments, a mission that had required her to infiltrate a criminal organization that was facilitating arms sales to terrorist groups. The operation had lasted over 2 years and had placed her in situations where discovery would have meant immediate execution. The success of that mission had disrupted weapons trafficking networks that had been responsible for supplying materials used in several terrorist attacks. Richardson's transition back to conventional military service after each covert assignment had required careful management of her official record and her psychological readjustment to traditional military structure. The skills she had developed during covert operations had made her an exceptionally effective officer in conventional roles, but she had learned to conceal the source of those capabilities from colleagues who were not cleared to know about her classified background. The years of operating under false identities had given Richardson insights into human psychology and international affairs that informed her current strategic thinking. Her ability to analyze complex situations and anticipate unexpected developments had been honed through experiences where miscalculation could have fatal consequences. Her calm demeanor under pressure reflected training that had prepared her for situations where emotional control was essential for survival. Her colleagues in the Strategic Operations Center knew her as a strategic thinker with exceptional analytical abilities, but they attributed these qualities to her conventional military experience and her academic background in international relations. They were unaware that her understanding of enemy capabilities and her insights into terrorist operations were based on direct experience. Rather than theoretical study, Morrison's question was forcing Richardson to consider whether the time had come to acknowledge the reality of her background to a broader group of colleagues. Her classified work had always been compartmentalized, known only to those with specific need-to-know access. However, her current position in strategic planning meant that her insights from covert operations could potentially benefit military decision-making if shared appropriately. The Admiral understood that her response to Morrison's question would determine whether her two professional identities would continue to remain separate or whether she would begin to integrate the lessons from her classified experience into her current role. The decision carried implications not only for her own career, but also for how her colleagues would understand her contributions to military planning and her perspectives on international threats. The silence stretched between Richardson and Morrison as the Admiral made her decision. She looked around the room one more time, noting which officers were present and considering their security clearances and their roles in current operations. Her years of experience in both conventional and covert military service had taught her to evaluate risks carefully, and she understood that her next words would have consequences that extended beyond this single conversation. Richardson realized that Morrison's question represented more than casual curiosity. His recent assignment to review personnel files for a new joint task force meant that he had legitimate access to her classified background, and his question suggested that he understood the potential value of integrating her covert experience with current strategic planning efforts. The military was facing increasingly complex international threats that required insights from officers who had direct experience with the unconventional tactics being employed by enemy organizations. The Admiral had spent years maintaining strict separation between her classified background and her public military career, but she recognized that the nature of modern warfare was making such compartmentalization less effective. The threats facing national security were evolving rapidly, and military leadership needed access to all available expertise to develop effective countermeasures. Her experience in covert operations provided perspectives on enemy capabilities and tactics that could inform strategic planning in ways that conventional intelligence gathering could. Not Richardson made her decision. She would answer Morrison's question honestly, acknowledging the reality of her classified background while maintaining appropriate operational security. Her response would need to be calibrated to provide useful information to her colleagues, while respecting the continuing classification of specific operational details. She understood that this moment would mark a transition in how she integrated her different professional experiences. Looking directly at Morrison, Richardson spoke with the calm confidence that had characterized her approach to difficult situations throughout her career. She acknowledged that she had indeed operated under various call signs during classified assignments, and that one of those identifications had been particularly significant during a long-term covert operation. Her tone was matter-of-fact, treating the information as a professional reality rather than something dramatic or unusual. The Admiral's response was carefully crafted to acknowledge Morrison's knowledge while providing context for her colleagues who were hearing this information for the first time. She explained that her conventional military record included periods of special assignment that had involved different types of service, and that these experiences had contributed to her current capabilities in strategic analysis and operational planning. Richardson's acknowledgement of her classified background immediately changed the dynamics in the room. Officers who had known her for years suddenly understood that their colleague had experience and expertise that went far beyond what they had previously realized. Her insights during strategic planning sessions, her calm demeanor during crisis situations, and her analytical approach to complex international problems took on new meaning when viewed in the context of her covert operational experience. The Admiral continued her explanation, providing enough detail to help her colleagues understand the scope of her experience, without revealing specific operational information that remained classified. She described the nature of covert intelligence work in general terms, explaining how such operations contributed to national security, and how the skills required for successful covert work translated into capabilities that were valuable in conventional military roles. Morrison nodded as Richardson spoke, satisfied that his question had achieved its intended purpose of opening a conversation about how classified experience could be better integrated into current strategic planning efforts. He had recognized that the military was facing challenges that required unconventional thinking, and he believed that officers like Richardson, who had experience in both conventional and covert operations, could provide valuable perspectives on developing effective responses to evolving threats. The other officers in the room listened with growing interest as they began to understand that their colleague possessed knowledge and experience that could inform their own work in ways they had not previously considered. The revelation was changing their perception of Richardson from a respected strategic thinker to someone whose insights were based on direct operational experience with the types of threats they were currently analyzing and planning to counter. Richardson could see the impact of her words on her colleagues, and she realized that this moment was creating opportunities for more effective collaboration and strategic planning. Her decision to acknowledge her classified background was opening doors for discussions that could enhance military effectiveness while maintaining appropriate security protocols. The careful compartmentalization that had characterized her career was giving way to a more integrated approach that could benefit national security in meaningful ways. Richardson paused after her initial explanation, recognizing that Morrison's question deserved a complete answer. The room had grown quieter as her colleagues absorbed the revelation that she had extensive covert operational experience. She understood that providing the specific call sign Morrison had asked about would give her audience a fuller picture of the nature of her classified work and the level of operations in which she had been involved. Taking a measured breath, Richardson looked directly at Morrison and spoke the words that would fundamentally change how everyone in the room understood her career and capabilities. She said simply, "Black Widow." The call sign hung in the air like a statement that carried weight far beyond its 2 syllables. Her voice remained steady and professional, but the impact of those words on her audience was immediate and profound. The designation, Black Widow, was not chosen randomly or assigned casually. In the world of covert operations, call signs often reflected either the nature of specific missions or the particular skills that operatives brought to their assignments. Richardson's call sign had been earned through her exceptional ability to establish trust with targets who had access to critical intelligence, and then to extract that information through relationships that the subjects never recognized as operational rather than personal. The methodology behind the Black Widow designation involved Richardson's talent for creating emotional connections with individuals who possessed information vital to national security. Her targets often believed they were developing personal relationships with someone who genuinely cared about them, when in reality, Richardson was systematically gathering intelligence that would be used to disrupt their activities or neutralize threats they represented. The psychological complexity of this work required exceptional emotional control and the ability to maintain deceptive relationships over extended periods. Richardson's success in these operations had been remarkable, but the personal cost had been significant. Maintaining false emotional connections while systematically betraying the trust of her targets had required her to compartmentalize her emotions in ways that affected her ability to form genuine personal relationships. The skills that made her effective as Black Widow had created psychological barriers that influenced her interactions even in non-operational contexts. The missions conducted under the Black Widow designation had been critical to national security, providing intelligence that had prevented terrorist attacks and disrupted criminal networks that threatened American interests. Richardson had operated in environments where discovery would have meant certain death, and her ability to maintain her cover while extracting vital information had saved countless lives. The success of these operations had been measured not in public recognition, but in attacks that never occurred and threats that were neutralized before they could be executed. Her colleagues in the Strategic Operations Center were beginning to understand the implications of Richardson's revelation. The calm, analytical officer they had worked with for years had actually been one of the military's most effective covert operatives, with experience in the most dangerous and psychologically demanding type of intelligence work. Her insights into enemy psychology and her ability to anticipate unconventional threats were based on direct experience rather than theoretical analysis. The Admiral's decision to reveal her call sign was also an acknowledgement that the nature of current threats required military leadership to draw upon all available expertise, including experience that had previously been compartmentalized. The enemies facing national security were increasingly sophisticated and were employing tactics that conventional military analysis might not fully anticipate. Officers with direct covert operational experience could provide perspectives that were essential for developing effective countermeasures. Richardson could see the impact of her revelation on the faces of her colleagues. Some appeared stunned by the realization that they had been working alongside someone with such extensive covert experience. Others seemed to be re-evaluating previous interactions and strategic discussions in light of this new understanding of her background. The room's atmosphere had shifted from casual conversation to something approaching awe and respect for capabilities they had not previously recognized. Morrison nodded with satisfaction, recognizing that Richardson's willingness to acknowledge her background opened possibilities for more effective strategic planning that could incorporate lessons learned from covert operations. The integration of classified experience with conventional military planning represented an evolution in how the military approached complex international threats. The Admiral understood that her revelation would have lasting implications for her relationships with her colleagues and her role in strategic planning. The careful separation between her covert background and her conventional military identity was ending, replaced by a more integrated approach that acknowledged the full scope of her experience and expertise. This transition represented both an opportunity and a challenge as she navigated the complexities of operating with a more complete professional identity. The moment Richardson spoke the words Black Widow, the atmosphere in the Strategic Operations Center underwent a dramatic transformation. Conversations that had been continuing quietly in the background stopped abruptly as officers turned their attention to the Admiral and began processing the significance of what they had just heard. The casual environment that had characterized the post-briefing period evaporated, replaced by a tension that reflected the profound implications of Richardson's revelation. Colonel Morrison had expected Richardson to acknowledge her classified background, but even he appeared surprised by her willingness to reveal the specific call sign that had defined some of her most dangerous and significant operations. The Black Widow designation was known among intelligence circles as representing the highest level of covert operational capability, involving missions that required exceptional psychological resilience and tactical expertise. Morrison realized that his casual question had uncovered information that changed his understanding of Richardson's capabilities and experience. The other officers in the room were struggling to reconcile their previous perceptions of Richardson with the reality of what Black Widow represented. They had known her as a strategic thinker and effective leader, but the revelation that she had operated under one of the military's most notorious covert call signs forced them to reconsider everything they thought they understood about her background and expertise. The calm demeanor and analytical approach that had characterized her conventional military service took on new meaning when viewed in the context of operations that had required her to deceive and manipulate targets while operating in hostile environments. General Patricia Martinez, who had worked closely with Richardson on several strategic planning initiatives, found herself re-evaluating previous conversations and decisions in light of this new information. Richardson's insights into enemy psychology and her ability to anticipate unconventional threats suddenly made sense when understood as products of direct operational experience rather than theoretical analysis. Martinez realized that Richardson's contributions to strategic planning had been informed by knowledge and perspectives that came from the most dangerous and demanding type of military service. Major David Chen, who had always respected Richardson's analytical abilities, was now understanding that her approach to intelligence assessment was based on direct experience with the methods and mindset of the adversaries they were studying. Her ability to identify weaknesses in enemy strategies and to predict their likely responses to various military actions was rooted in personal knowledge of how such organizations operated and how their members thought and made decisions. The room's silence stretched as officers absorbed the implications of Richardson's revelation. Some were beginning to understand that they had been working alongside someone whose experience exceeded their own by orders of magnitude, while others were grappling with the realization that their colleague had lived a professional life that involved constant danger and moral complexity that went far beyond conventional military service. Captain Sarah Williams, one of the few other women in the room, felt a complex mixture of admiration and concern as she considered what Richardson's covert career had required her to endure. The psychological demands of maintaining false identities while developing deceptive relationships with targets represented challenges that went beyond physical danger into territory that could fundamentally affect an individual's ability to form genuine human connections. Williams wondered how Richardson had managed to maintain her psychological health while conducting operations that required such sustained deception. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hayes was reconsidering his assumptions about the source of Richardson's strategic insights and her unusual ability to remain calm during crisis situations. Her experience as Black Widow explained capabilities that had seemed exceptional even by military standards. Hayes realized that Richardson's perspective on international threats was informed by direct engagement with the types of adversaries they were currently analyzing and planning to counter. The revelation was also creating practical implications for how the group would approach future strategic planning sessions. Richardson's acknowledged expertise in covert operations meant that her insights into enemy capabilities and tactics would carry additional weight and authority. Her colleagues were beginning to understand that they had access to knowledge and experience that could significantly enhance their effectiveness in developing countermeasures to evolving threats. Richardson observed the reactions of her colleagues with the same analytical attention she had applied to reading targets during her covert operations. She could see that some officers were struggling to integrate this new information with their previous understanding of her, while others were already beginning to consider how her experience could inform their current work. The Admiral recognized that this moment was creating both opportunities and challenges for her future role in military leadership. The silence in the room was finally broken by General Martinez, who spoke with a mixture of respect and curiosity that reflected the complex emotions Richardson's revelation had generated among her colleagues. Martinez acknowledged that the group was processing information that fundamentally changed their understanding of Richardson's background and capabilities, and she expressed appreciation for the Admiral's willingness to share information that could enhance their collective effectiveness in addressing current threats to national security. The aftermath of Richardson's revelation continued to ripple through the Strategic Operations Center as officers processed the implications of what they had learned. The Admiral maintained her composed demeanor while observing her colleagues' reactions, understanding that this moment would fundamentally alter her professional relationships and her role in military planning. The careful compartmentalization that had defined her career was ending, replaced by a new reality where her covert experience would be integrated with her conventional military responsibilities. General Martinez took the initiative to address the changed dynamics in the room, acknowledging that Richardson's background provided the group with access to expertise that could significantly enhance their strategic planning capabilities. Martinez emphasized that the revelation created opportunities for more effective analysis of current threats, particularly those involving unconventional tactics and psychological operations that were becoming increasingly common among enemy organizations. The discussion that followed Richardson's revelation was markedly different from typical strategic planning conversations. Officers began asking questions that reflected their new understanding of her expertise, seeking insights into enemy psychology and operational methods that could inform their approach to current threats. Richardson found herself explaining concepts and perspectives that she had previously kept separate from her conventional military discussions, sharing knowledge that could help her colleagues better understand the adversaries they were analyzing. Colonel Morrison expressed satisfaction that his question had opened a conversation that would benefit military effectiveness, acknowledging that the integration of classified experience with conventional planning represented an evolution in how the military approached complex international challenges. He recognized that Richardson's willingness to share her background created opportunities for strategic insights that had previously been unavailable to the group. The impact of Richardson's revelation extended beyond the immediate conversation to influence how her colleagues approached their ongoing responsibilities. Officers who had previously relied primarily on conventional intelligence analysis began incorporating perspectives informed by direct operational experience with enemy organizations. The Admiral's insights into how Adversaries thought and operated provided context that enhanced the group's ability to anticipate threats and develop effective countermeasures. Richardson's role in strategic planning evolved significantly in the weeks following her revelation. Her colleagues began seeking her input on situations involving psychological operations, covert activities, and unconventional threats, recognizing that her experience provided valuable perspectives that were not available through traditional intelligence channels. The Admiral found herself serving as a bridge between the worlds of conventional military planning and covert operations, helping to integrate insights from both domains. The personal implications for Richardson were complex and significant. After years of maintaining strict separation between her covert background and her conventional military identity, she was learning to operate with a more integrated professional persona. The psychological adjustments required were substantial as she navigated relationships with colleagues who now understood aspects of her experience that had previously been hidden from them. Her colleagues' respect for Richardson deepened as they gained appreciation for the challenges she had faced and the contributions she had made to national security. Through her covert operations, the revelation created opportunities for more authentic professional relationships, as Richardson was no longer required to conceal significant aspects of her experience and expertise from her peers. The strategic planning capabilities of the entire group were enhanced by Richardson's willingness to share her background. Her insights into enemy psychology and operational methods informed approaches to current threats that were more sophisticated and effective than previous strategies. The integration of covert operational experience with conventional military planning represented a significant advancement in the group's analytical capabilities. Richardson's decision to acknowledge her background also created precedents for how the military might better integrate classified experience with conventional planning in the future. Her revelation demonstrated that compartmentalization, while necessary for operational security, could sometimes limit the military's ability to leverage all available expertise in addressing evolving threats. The Admiral reflected on the transformation. In her professional life, with a mixture of relief and apprehension, the burden of maintaining separate identities was lifting, but the challenges of operating with a more complete professional persona were significant. Richardson understood that her revelation had created opportunities for more effective service to national security, while also requiring her to navigate new complexities in her relationships with colleagues and her role in military leadership. The conversation in the Strategic Operations Center that began with Morrison's casual question had evolved into a significant moment that would influence military planning and Richardson's career for years to come. The Admiral's willingness to bridge the gap between her covert background and her conventional military service represented both a personal transformation and a professional evolution that would benefit national security in ways that extended far beyond that single conversation.